Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to talk all about concealer and powder for beginners, okay? We're not going to get into super complex techniques or anything just because, well, one, I don't know anything about all that kind of stuff, and two, that's not what this video is about. Concealer is primarily used for three things, okay? One is to correct imperfections, two is to highlight the points that we want to bring attention to the face, and then third is to prime the eyes for eyeshadow. Depending on what you're going to be using the concealer for, you may need more than one concealer to achieve the look you're going for. But keep in mind, concealers, they come in different shades, obviously. They come in different coverage levels. They come in different formulas, thicker, thinner, etc., just like foundations do. So for correcting imperfections on the face, you typically want a thicker formula so that you'll get more coverage, and you're going to want one that is a similar shade to the foundation that you're going to be using so that it blends seamlessly. For any areas that you're wanting to highlight or under the eyes, I typically go for a lighter concealer under the eyes, but you could use one that is the same shade as your foundation. But for the areas where you want to highlight or have a little bit of a brighter appearance, you want to go 1 to 2 shades lighter. And then for concealer to go on the eyelids for an eyeshadow primer, you can use a brighter one, or you could use one that is the same color as your foundation. But typically, if you're using a really thick formula on your face, you don't want to use that on your eyelid. It's just going to look too heavy up there on your eyelid. So with all that said, let's get started. All right, so I have prepped my face. I did my skincare. I primed my face. The only primer I used today is my tried and true Tarte Timeless Smoothing Primer. I can never remember the name of it. And I went ahead and did my eyebrows and then did my tinted sunscreen. At this point with the concealer, you've got a couple options. You can either go ahead and use your face concealer to cover up any imperfections before putting on your base makeup, or you can put your base makeup on first and then apply any touch-ups that you need with your face concealer. My preferred method is to do my base first and then go in and see what I need to cover. So I feel like some things that look like they may need extra coverage may get enough coverage from my base makeup. So I just wait till after I do my foundation to touch up any imperfections that still need a little bit of covering up. The base makeup that I'm going to be using today is the Prada. This is a fairly new foundation for me, and I'm still trying to figure out if I love it more than my top fave. The shade match is perfect. I think that's the main saving grace for this one, but I'm still unsure of the formula. So some of the areas that look like they may need extra coverage is like right here. Like I said, you could go in before putting on your base makeup and go ahead and put a layer of concealer on there. But I just want to see how the base makeup does covering it. The benefit of waiting is that, one, you may end up not using concealer where you thought you would, or less concealer, and you'll end up with less layers of makeup. It's always best to use the least amount of layers possible. So if I can avoid using concealer where I really didn't need it, that's what I'm gonna do. Okay, base makeup's done, so if we kind of look and reassess, I'm looking in my mirror here, I still have like a tiny bit of redness here, a little bit of discoloration here. This is an age spot, age spots are really hard to cover up entirely, so sometimes we just kind of have to embrace a little bit of our imperfections, and it's all, you know, individualized. So an imperfection on one person's skin, they may not care, whereas it really may bother another person. It really comes down to how much coverage you want and how flawless you want your skin. For me, I think it's okay, especially on an everyday basis, to have a little bit of like normal skin imperfections showing through. It doesn't really bother me so much. For imperfections covering the face, you want something that is a little bit more of a thick formula. And the one I have is the NARS Soft Matte Complete Concealer. So it comes in a pot, so it's super creamy, super thick. And you want the concealer to be a match to your foundation. That way you're not going to have spots all over your face where you've tried to cancel out any imperfections and you end up with a bunch of mismatched spots on your face, which really, it doesn't achieve the result we're trying to go for. So I just have this little eyeshadow brush and I just pick up some out of the pot. I'll touch any areas that need some concealing. I'm just not going to worry about that spot right there because it's not going to get covered with my concealer. I know this because I've been doing my makeup every day for a while. And I just rather not add unnecessary layers when it's not really going to achieve the result that I want. And when I put those spots on, I do want the formula to dry down just a little bit. It doesn't have to dry down too much because this is already such a thick formula, but if you're using a thinner formula, you especially want that to really dry down and set a little bit. That way it'll give you more coverage and less likely to kind of blend out into nothing. While those areas set, then we're going to move on to correcting the under eye. Now, I don't know how well you can see in the camera, but I do have some kind of bluish purple dark circles under my eyes. And the way to fix those is you want to go in with a color corrector first. Now, color correctors for dark circles, they come in pink, they come in more of like a peach or orange color, and you really, sometimes you have to just kind of play around and see what covers your under eye circles the best. In my experience, I feel like if you're more cool toned, then a pink one works best. And if you're more warm toned, then maybe an orange or peach based color corrector will do better on you. And if you have any questions on whether you're cool toned, warm toned, or whatnot, refer back to my foundation video where I talk about how to figure it out. So because I am neutral leaning cool, I like using a pink color corrector. And the reason you want to use a color corrector is you want to neutralize any of the blue or purple before going in with a concealer. If you go straight in with a concealer, then without correcting first, you can end up with almost like an ashy appearance. So we want to neutralize that first. I've got my NYX Pro Fix Stick Correcting Concealer. I've got the shade Pink. So I'm just going to put this in the areas where I have that dark purplish blue color. Now I'm just going to take my pinky finger and tap it out. Okay, so you see that area looks a lot brighter. One thing to keep in mind when you put your color corrector on there is a lot of times they're called a concealer, but they're really not a concealer. They're not there to conceal or, cover up anything. So when you put it on, you might think, well, that didn't really do a whole lot of covering, but the point of them is not really to cover anything, it's to neutralize the colors. So after that's put on, then we'll go in with the concealer. The formula you want to use for under the eyes needs to be a thinner formula than what we use for our face, unless you have like super oily under eyes, which most people do not. So the formula that you go with under your eyes needs to be a thinner formula. It doesn't have to be super thin and watery, but it needs to be thinner than what was used on the face. I found that for me, now this again is individualized. Some people will fare better with really thin formulas. Some need ones that are a little bit more thick. I found that when I used like a super thin formula, it tends to settle in my creases, my under eye creases, a little bit worse than a thicker formula. So I tend to like a thicker formula for under the eyes. One that I've really been enjoying here recently has been the Haus Labs, and I got the shade 12. It's a light rosy color, so it's a little bit pink toned, again, to help neutralize the under eye dark areas. But it's a little bit thicker than what I had been using, so this one doesn't settle in my lines as bad. And what I like to do is to choose a shade that is 1 to 2 shades lighter than the rest of my face, just to give a little bit of brightening. Again, that's my personal choice. You could very well go with the same shade that the rest of your face is. It's all, you know, what your personal preference is. So I'm just going to take some of my concealer. Now, you know, back in the day, like 10 or so years ago, they used to, you know, put like this whole triangle of concealer under the eyes. And while you could still do that, it tends to be just overkill. You don't need that much, and it more likely will cause it to look really cakey and heavy under the eye. So I just put a little bit in my corner and then a little bit out here, and that just helps give like a lifted look to the eye. And then we'll repeat over here. Now I'm going to take my concealer brush. This one is from Anisa. I really do love it. It's pretty dense and it's thin, so it gets up in the corners. So we'll just tap, and you don't want to aggressively blend. Just tapping over it. What I like to do to help this last as long as possible is I will blend it out for the most part. It doesn't have to be blended out completely, but I'll blend it out for the most part. And I'll also blend out my little face spots a little bit. And then I'll take some setting spray. I've got the Charlotte Tilbury Airbrush Flawless Setting Spray. Shake it up and then just do a couple sprays. Let that soak in for just a couple minutes. That'll help set the concealer in place so you get a little bit more longevity with it. Okay, so that has dried for a couple minutes. So we're just gonna kind of go over the little areas and tap all those areas completely out. Okay, as you can see, everything is blended out evenly. You don't see any harsh lines of here's where the concealer is and here's where it stops. The goal is not to have harsh lines. We want everything blended. A trick you can do if you feel like you have applied too much and you want to tone it down a little bit, you can grab a dry beauty blender or beauty sponge and tap in those areas and it'll soak up the excess. Another function of concealer is to brighten and highlight, okay, not just under the eyes. And so for that, you can use the same concealer that you put under your eyes if you chose to use one that's like 1 to 2 shades lighter than the rest of your face. I've got the Natasha Denona one in N2. To highlight the face with the concealer, you put it on any area that you want highlighted. So down the bridge of the nose, you could do the top of your chin. What I would do is I would just, like we did with our under eye concealer, I would just kind of tap it out a little bit And then I would spray my face again with that setting spray. Now you could have done this all in one step. And then we'll just, again, let this dry down. Then we'll go in and blend it the rest of the way out. Okay, it has dried down, so we're just gonna go in and finish blending it out. If you are unsure on what areas to highlight, keep in mind, well, one, it is completely optional. You do not have to do it. But two, highlighting brings things forward. Say, have a larger nose and you don't want to bring attention to it. You would not highlight your nose, okay? If you have a really big chin and you don't want to accentuate or bring attention to it, you would not highlight that. But, if you had, say, really deep smile lines and you want to make them look not so deep and want to bring them forward, you would highlight that area. You would personalize it to your face and what you were trying to accomplish. The last way to use concealer that we're going to talk about is as an eyeshadow primer. I like using the concealer as an eyeshadow primer because, one, it cancels out any discoloration I have on my eyelids, and then if I top it with a little bit of powder, it provides just a nice, smooth, clean base to build my eyeshadows on. So again, personal preference. You don't have to do it. It's just what I like to do. Most of the time, I just use what I used up underneath my eyelids just to make it simple. You could use a concealer with the same color as your foundation. I just wouldn't use like the thicker formula that we put on our face. So we put it on and we tap it out. And I'm carrying that all the way up to my brow bone. Okay, so at this point, we've gotten all the concealer on that we were going to put on for our various reasons. Now we've got to powder it all down. So if you want to do cream bronzer or cream blush or anything like that, you need to put all that on before you go and powder. I'm going to skip that. I'm going to the gym in a little bit, so I don't need, all the makeup for today, although there's nothing wrong with it if you wanted to wear all that to the gym. I just don't want all those layers because I'm just going to sweat and end up wiping it off my face anyway. So for today's look, I am ready for powder. When we talk about powder, there's usually two main reasons to use powder. You've got setting powders and finishing powders. If you have super, super dry skin, you could forego both. Most people get a little bit oily in the T-zone. If that's you, I would powder down in the T-zone to help with oil control and to set all that makeup. If you are dry and on the perimeter of your skin, you could forego that area and just focus on the T-zone. And if you're really oily, I would just do it all over. I'm not going to talk about like the baking method of powder just because that's not really for beginners. I don't do it. I'm not super skilled in it, so I wouldn't want to give my, suggestions on how to do it. I ain't getting into that. First thing I'm gonna do is set my eyelids with some setting powder. So setting powder is gonna be what you use to set your cream products. I use this in between applying my cream products and my powder products. So if I'm using cream, blush, and bronzer, I apply those. Then I apply my setting powder to set those in place. And then I go on top of that with my powder, bronzer, and blush. Setting powders are usually loose powders. They're not pressed powders. So you can see in this one, this is my Laura Mercier translucent loose setting powder. What I'm going to do is I just put a little bit in the cap. And then I like this little brush to put powder on my eyelids. So I'm just going to dip into my cap. Grab my concealer brush and I'm going to tap out that crease. See how I got a crease on this side? We'll just tap that out because you don't want to set that creased cream product. And I'm just going to tap this powder on. Now we will do the other side. And we will get more powder on our little brush. And tap that in place, and that will lock it in place. That will help us keep from getting creasing in our eyeshadows and all that. Okay, so setting powders, they come in different colors. Some are translucent, which are going to work for the majority of skin tones. Some you can get with a little bit of color correcting in them. One of those with a color correcting is going to be the Givenchy loose powder. So this one is in the color 3, and it's got a pink tone to it, and that will help cancel out any darkness or anything under the skin. And you could get them in peach. They've got them in like more of a yellow, or you could just go with a neutral color if that's your personal preference. So I just put a little bit in the cap, and then I'm going to take this brush and we're going to get our under eye. This color is good for setting the middle of the face where we've done especially that brightening with our concealer. I wouldn't necessarily use this for the entire face, again, because I'm not trying to brighten my entire face. I'm trying to brighten the center where we've highlighted. So I would use the Laura Mercier translucent powder on the rest of my face. I've got my concealer brush, and I'm just gonna gently tap out those creases, and then take my powder brush and tap the powder in. This is why I like this little brush, because I can get in my inner corner really well. And then we'll do the other side. And I'm going to get in these little crevices right here, which is, again, this brush is great for. And if I didn't mention it, this is BK Beauty Angie Hot and Flashy 8506. I think it's supposed to be a concealer brush, but I like it for this purpose because it does really good getting into those crevices. You could always use a powder brush. You could also use the little velour puff. This one's from Sephora, but they've got them on Amazon. They're pretty cheap. For this one, so I just put a little bit more powder in there, and I'm just going to dip my puff in there, and then what I like to do is just rub it on my palm. That way I get more of an even distribution on there, and then I just tap it. One thing I can't believe I forgot to mention, but powdering here on the side of my nose like this with the velour puff does help mask enlarged pores. So up between the eyebrows where I'm powdering, and down on my chin and beside my nose is where I have my largest pores. So I really try to powder those areas well to help mask my enlarged pores. On the areas that, again, need the brightening. Just picking up a little bit more, rubbing it on my hand, and tap. Okay, center of the face is powdered. If you do not get oily on the perimeter of your face, you could skip powdering the rest of your face. I tend to get oily everywhere, especially if I'm going to go work out. So I'm going to powder the entirety of my face. One thing to remember too is if you are going to put powder, bronzer, or blush on top of like a wet foundation, it can go on a little bit patchy if your foundation hasn't dried down. Some foundations are just made to where they don't really set down very well, and some do. I always err on the side of caution and powder those areas. When I go to put on my powder, bronzer, or blush, I know it's going to go on evenly because it's on top of a dry layer of powder. So I've put some of my Laura Mercier setting powder in my cap, and I've got a big old fluffy brush. This is an e.l.f. brush, I believe. Yeah, an e.l.f. powder brush. An e.l.f. powder brush. And tap that in, and then I just kind of tap around the perimeter of my face where I did not set with that pink powder. Okay, so entire face is set now. We are good. We are done with our setting powder. Let me just apply a little bit of bronzer and blush, and then we'll get back to it. Okay, I have my bronzer and my blush. I went ahead and did my mascara, a little bit of liner in the waterline. I did use my bronzer just in the crease as like a little bit of eyeshadow. I didn't do a big eyeshadow look today only because, like I said, I'm going to the gym, so I didn't really want to do all that. So now that we have all of this on, very, very last step is going to be a finishing powder. Now, again, this is something that is optional. Finishing powders tend to be more of a pressed powder formula, and the way I use them is I will go ahead and set my makeup with some setting spray. The one I'm using today is my One Size. This is like hairspray for your face. You're gonna let that dry. Once it's dry, then you're gonna go in with your finishing powder. The one I'm gonna use today is the Guerlain Meteorites. I'm still not 100% sure I like this, but I'm still trying it out. Now, this one is a little bit different of a formula than a typical pressed powder or finishing powder. It's little pearls. And so for this type, I'll take a fluffy brush and swirl it in the pearls. And then what you would do is you would just buff over everything. Finishing powder helps lock everything in. It helps blend everything out just to be kind of seamless. And it also, if you happen to apply like too much blush or too much bronzer or whatever, it can help buff that out and make it a little bit less in your face. Another finishing powder that I really like that's in the pressed formula is the Charlotte Tilbury powder. I've got the color Fair. I think it's more of a translucent, so it would work for a lot of different skin tones, but it's just this little pressed powder, and I use one of the little Amazon puffs, and I just swirl in there and tap. Typically, finishing powders are going to be better for touch-ups later in the day than a setting powder, so I do keep these in my purse. Let's just add some lips, and we are done. I'm going to use my Buxom Powerline Plumping Lip Liner. It doesn't really plump. I don't know what it's talking. Maybe it just is supposed to give the illusion of bigger lips. I don't know. And then I'm going to use my Naturium Phytoglow Lip Balm in the color Lychee. Or is it Lychee? I think it's Lychee. Okay. That is the finished look. Now, would I normally wear this amount of makeup to the gym? No. But I'm not mad about it either. I think it turned out really pretty. Let me know if you have any questions about anything down in the comments below, and I will get back to you. As always, thank you for watching. Thank you for being here with me. Don't forget to subscribe and like the video before you leave. I'll see y'all in the next one.